Good evening, this is your Gentleman B970, and in this video we'll be looking at continuing off with looking and reviewing Scots bass lessons. In the last video we were looking at the bass rig, where what it was basically is that we want the funk, and in that kind of aspect, in this video what we want is the groove. So that's what it is when we are reviewing Scots bass line and in this kind of aspect. So when we learn the groove, as Carol Kay says, if you learn the top notes, sometimes you have no bearing on what the groove is. So if you rely on the top notes, you can no longer hear the groove. And you had another keyboard player that came on and was talking about how, when he was doing Luther Vandross covers, he was playing the groove and the main ingredients, and everybody else was playing the top notes. So this is the kind of aspects where we are, and when we do this, we kind of get into still continuing in the kind of Victor Bailey possibilities of looking at the bass in kind of early stages. So in that kind of first aspect, imagine that we're in the coffee department, in the basement, in the coffee depot. We're in the basement, we're sweeping up. It's been a really hard day. You've been trying to get rid of rats. You've been picking up rubbish and putting them in the bin. It's been a really, really tough day. And, and you've got people that come up and tell you that they play, bass lines behind the beat. And they do this by putting on a metronome, so they kind of put on a metronome and then they start playing the bass. And then they tell you that they're playing behind the beat because they started that bass line on this side of the metronome instead of the other side of the metronome. So when we're looking at forget-me-nots, just to go into some simple points, if you're playing forget-me-nots and you've got the metronome in that kind of sense, well, then it's still going to be the top notes that we're playing. So they will still be the top notes of that song. So let's say, for example, it's, oh my God, you put on the metronome. Or you might put the metronome on. Or you might put the metronome on. So wherever you play this bass line according to what the metronome is saying, whatever side of the metronome the bass line is played on first, they're still the top notes. And so what the groove does is give us a kind of relation to the top notes and kind of learn a kind of different understanding about what it is when we play a note behind the beat. So the groove can kind of help us. So let's say, for example, Miles Davis is in Ronnie Scots, and Miles Davis says, "Can you please play F sharp?" And we're rehearsing Forget-Me-Nots. So you play the bass line. And he says, "I can't hear it." So you play it louder. And he says, "Someone get the manager, we got a problem." So what it is in that sense is that in places like Ronnie Scott's, where there's some really, really big musicians, and you could be like a young musician or student musician like myself, I played at Ronnie Scott's and done the Chicken by Jaco Pastorius in that kind of sense, just like a blues bass line. But you could be, backstage behind the stage practicing. And then ready to go on stage, and you begin playing, and then people can't hear you. So you panic and turn the amplifier up, and then you're kind of too loud. So what it is in that kind of aspect is that in some cases you kind of have to pitch the notes so you can actually hear the note that you're playing. So in that kind of analogy, you know, if you've got someone like Miles Davis and says, play F sharp, please. So when you do it, you pitch F sharp, so it's F sharp minor. And so effectively, the F sharp is the top note, and the A is the note behind the beat. So that's the note that you play behind the beat. So effectively, when you think in terms of Victor Bailey and guys like that, and you know, and you go to places like Berkeley, sometimes they get you to not play the top note and only play the notes that are kind of behind the beat. And you get this kind of feeling when you're playing the bass kind of behind the beat. So that's another way of looking at playing behind the beat when you're looking in terms of the groove. So all we've got to do now is just go through the steps of understanding F sharp minor, realizing that there's two minors, one of them's harmonic, the other one is melodic. So sometimes when we've got a tune, you can kind of play both, where you go down playing one part of the minor scale and you come up playing the other part, and so on and so on. So in the Forget-Me-Nots bass line, you can kind of hear that kind of thing in the harmony, because when you listen to the vocals, you get this kind of feeling. Hear me now, forget me not, help me to remember. Hear me now, forget me not, help me to remember. So you've got a call and a reply in the bass line, and you can hear that it's harmonically different. So you could effectively use these two different kind of minor scales to kind of split up the two kind of bass lines. So in the groove, in the ingredients, not the top notes, imagine the top notes as the icing on the cake. So in the ingredients, you can kind of prepare these certain kind of ingredients in the groove to give the bass a little bit more earring in its sound. So effectively, we've got to just get in the kind of groove. So when we do that, we get this kind of sound, and this sound is a little bit like Charlie Mingus in that sense, because that's where we want to go with Carol Kay, all the way back to the guys that kind of play groove in a kind of natural way. So we get this kind of feeling. And the corresponding minor. So we've got these two kind of minors. So now we can get that in a Charlie Mingus kind of feeling. Obviously this groove is not the same melody as Forget-Me-Nots, so what we've got to do is move the groove so it fits the melody. And so when we do this, and bearing in mind we've got the two separate minors, what happens unfortunately when you look at it this way is that the groove becomes too flat and too sharp for the icing top notes to fit on. But you also have to bear in mind that it was another kind of bass player, and he ran from one side of his town to the other town to actually see and hear what it actually sounds like when you have the kind of raw ingredients without the icing sugar on, and how some of the notes don't quite correlate to the top notes. So it kind of sounds like this. I beg your pardon. So that's the kind of thing that the guy kind of ran to one side of the town to kind of hear, because there were sharp notes and flat notes that didn't correlate to the top notes, and those two notes are E flat and F. They don't actually correlate to the sort of like melody that you're hearing, but when you put them in the ingredients, they kind of make the ingredients kind of, you know, bitter and sweet. So that's the kind of thing that you get when you do the groove. The kind of interim kind of riffs that are in the tune, when you look at those and you look at those in terms of the groove, the same kind of thing happens, because when you play the initial groove on the last kind of sequence, you got this kind of feeling, but obviously in the increment we know it's not that particular part of the minor harmony. So what happens is when you play the kind of riff, sorry, so when you play the ingredients, you can kind of hear some of the notes and where they actually fit in, even though they're not in the icing, they're not on the top, they're not part of the top notes, the icing top notes. So you can get this kind of feeling when you actually hear the kind of groove in that kind of sense. So now we kind of get it, that when we're looking at bass lines, we really want to be looking at bass lines in terms of trying to understand the groove. And when we use the groove, then we can find out where some of the notes behind the beat are, or where to put some of the notes behind the beat when we play the bass line. So we get this kind of feeling. So when we want to look at some various notes behind the beat, so we've got all these different ways of actually looking at playing behind the beat by using the groove as the main ingredients to look to where the top notes actually fit. So finally, we've just got to get into the fact with Scots bass lessons where people say you're not playing the A. So in that kind of sense is that the note is an A. In that sense, when we look at the groove, it tells us in that sense. So you can really hear that there is definitely an A in the bass line. So what it is with Scott's bass lessons is that what he's actually doing is muting the A note. But what's happened over the years of the history of playing the bass is that some people actually see the clicks as just being clicks, where they are in fact real notes. So to get this in kind of perspective, what we can kind of do is do an exercise where we play a bass line like this. And we can hear the clicks. So the producer comes along, someone like Quincy Jones, can you please play the C and G? So now we'll play the C and G and not play the clicks. says, that's great, now mute them. So now you mute them. And then you might go on tour and actually just play the clicks. But now you can hear the earring that it's actually C and G. So that's what's actually happening when Scots plays it. He forgets through the history of playing the bass that the clicks are in fact notes. So when we play a bass line in this kind of standard, it meant that the pioneers of slapping the bass had to work out what notes to mute and what notes not to mute. So when we play a bass line like that, we kind of ignore the fact that we're listening to the standard earring, which would be in the perfect sense of the fifths and so on. So that kind of bass line without the clicks would be. And then all of a sudden, over years and years and years, we don't have to listen to the ingredients anymore. We just listen to the top notes. And we can hear the inside feeling. So that's what kind of happens when you play bass lines. And so ultimately, if we look at We Supply, remember We Supply the Funk. So imagine now that we play We Supply the Funk. So effectively, every single one of those clicks is in fact a real note that has been muted. So that's the way to solve the kind of problem. So when you've got people like Scots Bass Lessons, Paul Turner, and so many bass players that are into that kind of understanding, is that when you play the clicks, they do actually correspond to real notes. It's what it is that over the time of playing bass, we kind of ignore sometimes where those notes correspond to. So thank you for watching this video, and I'm coming straight back now where we'll be looking at Deeper Underground. Thank you for watching my video. Thank you.